young, now I'm old. I used to be hot, now I'm almost cold. I used to be hard as candy, but I've been sucked on too long, so long, so long. I used to be high, and now I'm low. I used to be wise, now I don't know. I used to make magic and turn men into toads. Now I'm the one who follows them down the road. I wear a red bullseye on the chest of my white wedding dress. Oh, I need a doctor. I need a doctor. I need a doctor. I need a doctor. I used to wear black.
All right. Well, it could be said that this republic needs a doctor, and that many people in this republic need a doctor for more conventional reasons. And by the way, that's the Neils. Somebody once described them as sounding like a bowl of granola and M80s. That was me, actually, who did that. All right, so my name is Colin. I'll be your host today. Have you dined with us before? Because we do things a little differently around here. So, yes, we have no particular plan today, and we have no particular guests scheduled for today. We do have a phone line, which you can call, 888-720-WNPR, 888-720-9677. I'm not even going to tell you why I'm laughing. So, what else do you need to know? You need to know that should we face a topic emergency, a topic shortage, I have a sealed envelope here from Mr. Karp, whom I've known since my college years and who was like the smartest person at Yale University while I was in college. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's in here. Would somebody from the audience like to come up on stage here and just inspect this envelope to make it clear that it is sealed? I don't know what's in it. I think Mr. Karp maybe even put tape across. Yeah, he did. All right, so we can always do that too. Oh, the way that works, though, you have to understand the rules, which I personally have made up, is that the Mr. Karp envelope will only be opened if someone calls in and asks for it to be opened, and then that person might have to participate briefly in a conversation with me about whatever the topics are. What's in here are newspaper clippings, I should say, newspaper clippings that Mr. Karp has deemed relevant. Not necessarily as talk radio topics, but just he feels I should have them. And they're heavily underlined, too. I know that without having to open the envelope. All right, here we go. The number is 888-720-9677. And we have people calling in, which is the plan. That's what they're supposed to do. And I think we should begin with Daniel from Windsor. Hi, Daniel. You're on the air.
Hey there, Colin. First time calling in, long time listener.
Oh. So I should have said more. Thank you for your many years of listening, and I'm so glad that you found the initiative today to call in.
Well, right on. So I wanted to pick your brain on something that's been bugging me for a while. So obviously we're coming up here on the anniversary of the January 6th insurrections, and I see a lot of talk going on about sort of what went wrong, and of course voting rights. But one thing that I'm not sure I've seen a lot of, and I really wanted to get your take on, was the actual mechanics that were almost abused by Donald Trump and Mike Pence, specifically sort of how there was almost a constitutional crisis because, Donald Trump wanted Pence to not certify the election. And no one's really talked about fixing, at least to my knowledge, fixing that actual mechanic or loophole that maybe might have been exposed. So I'm curious what your take is on that, and if you think that at some point that's something we should get to.
Well, yeah, although, I mean, some of those mechanics are in the Constitution and require a constitutional amendment to change them. So it kind of depends on which mechanics we're talking about here. To me, I mean, it would be, maybe it does make sense to fix those mechanics, but to me, if we're talking about having members of the House vote to certify election results, I mean, I think the problem we need to address, I don't know how we address it. I mean, we've done nothing but try to address it for years now, is it's a worsening syndrome, which is that people don't act in good faith anymore. And they put party over country. They put party over fact and truth. I mean, 147 members of Congress voted not to accept the election results for no reason. There was no fact pattern out there that made that necessary. I mean, between January 6th and working back to early November, this had been investigated every which way. It had been in front of every imaginable court. Judges, many of them Trump appointees, refused to side, with the complaint, and sometimes even rebuked the Republican complainants who were trying to undermine. So if you have a society where 147 members of Congress will vote against election results, for no reason other than it's convenient for them to do that. I mean, in a way, when you're looking at something and asking yourself, is this sliding into something that's not democracy, something that's much more autocratic, something that's a borderline dictatorship or a tyranny? There's two real early questions you ask. One of them is, do election results stand? In other words, do election results determine who sits in office? And how is violence incorporated or not incorporated into the political system? I mean, on January 6th, we failed, one of those things. I mean, violence was drastically incorporated, and we nearly failed the other one. But I don't know. I mean, the same people who voted not to certify that election result would probably vote against any structural reform. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
That's terrifying.
Yeah,
That's a terrifying thought. I think that a lot of what you said is right. That it's just one of those things that a lot of the people that are currently representing us just aren't really representing the actual election results. So I don't know. I don't know if you've talked to someone or have any conversations that have given you more hope. But yeah, that's a scary sort of place to be.
I don't. I think everybody has to talk to everybody else, and I obviously, or at least hopefully, not in a screaming adversarial way. But I don't know. I had a little back and forth with, I guess, a former town council member from Glastonbury or something who's just on Twitter, and we were commenting on some stuff, and at one point I said, I brought up some of these kind of national issues, and she sort of said, well, those are national issues. And I'm a Glastonbury Republican. I mean, these aren't really my problem. And my thought is everybody, that's why they're called grassroots, right? Everybody in the Republican Party who has any kind of conscience and wants this country to work the way it's supposed to work should be making it clear that as far as anybody can tell, as far as they can tell, Biden was legitimately elected president. Those election results should be accepted. But I mean, we saw polling over the weekend where a certain percentage of Republicans still think that Donald Trump should try to reclaim the presidency now. I can't remember what the percent was, but it was kind of alarmingly high. So, I mean, with no election in sight, just try to get it back somehow. So, but I do think that what's really important is that people of conscience within the Republican Party, constantly make it clear that they still want to participate in a system where, the person who wins the majority of electoral votes wins the presidency. And they're not really doing that. So, that's maybe a place to begin, just maybe a little tug on the sleeve of any Republican, They don't have to be an office holder, just any Republican saying that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be the way it's been. That's important. That's an important thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I wish I had more.
No, that's fine. I think the mechanical piece really scares me a lot. Obviously, I think the bigger sort of philosophical stuff, you can sort of get pulled into fights over dogma all day. But I think that the mechanic piece, that there were some clear sort of weaknesses that were exposed, it scares me a lot.
Yes. Look, the weaknesses are now glaring weaknesses. They're weaknesses that, that are they're symptoms, to use the medical analogy, that are present in the body politic right now, and they're not potential symptoms. they're there right now. All right, I'm just going to keep going down the line here to Sheila and then to Matt. Everybody calling right now is from a town that begins with W. So Windsor, Wallingford, Waterbury, that's where people are calling from right now. I hope we get a call from Willingworth and Wold Saybrook, all those towns. All right, Sheila, you have the floor.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call, Colin. And thanks for, doing this topic again. I'm usually not home, so I'm taking the opportunity. Over Christmas, we had a little conversation at dinner time. It was about common sense gun laws or the lack of them. And it's just been so discouraging that the progress has not been, we've not taken that leap to get rid of certain guns, semi-automatics, all the things that people talk about. And the violence continues and mass shootings. Here in Connecticut, we know only too well, how impactful it is. So, I kind of been thinking, and I've thought over the last couple of years, but it came up again at Christmas. Why, with all these wonderful common sense gun law advocacy groups, why do you think it is that none of them have joined forces into one, combined into one? I feel like we need one that is for common gun sense laws to beat the one that's not. And I hate to, I didn't ever want to go there, but I feel like it's at this point we need that. And I wondered if you'd heard anything in your circles, in the media, local, national. Has anybody ever talked about it in that way?
Say it again. Talked about what?
Talked about joining. So you've got the Brady, the Brady group. You've got Connecticut Guns,
Mm-hmm.
Against Violence, Giffords, Sandy Hook. There's a million. I'm exaggerating, but there's one NRA.
Right. So
Why?
it's an interesting question, and I don't have an answer to it, and I don't know anything about it necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily the case that there is greater strength in having just one organization, or I guess as you're suggesting, maybe a coalition of organizations with similar interests. I mean, in a way, you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket when you do that. I'm guessing that a lot of these organizations talk to the same members of Congress. I'm sure they all talk to Chris Murphy. They're all aware of each other. I don't know. It might not. I understand the point you're making now, and you might be right. But I don't think it's axiomatic that if they all worked together, if they all combined and sort of did the same thing, it would be better. I mean, maybe they're better off. I mean, look at the Remington victory here in Connecticut. Maybe they're better off pursuing. I mean, I think one thing that we can say is that somehow or other, the people who support fairly untrammeled gun rights have now disconnected reality from their principle or their belief, their kind of first principle, which is, I mean, if you talk to people, anybody, even a gun rights nut, I shouldn't put it that way. But, I mean, if you ask them, look, do you think we should do anything we can to keep guns out of the hands of criminals? They'll say yes. Oh, yeah, we should definitely do that. I don't think there are too many people, even, NRA card holders, who would say, no, I don't think so. I think criminals have the same rights to guns as everybody else. I mean, so, but what's happened somehow is that reality has become disconnected from principle. And I think in that situation, it's really kind of hard to change minds because it's not like an additional set of facts is going to make a difference at that point. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, there are facts and there are made up facts, and the Constitution is a fact, but it was written in a time where those facts were different than they are now. And so I hear you. I know I've been in I've environmental organizations, and if you don't always have the same focus point or point of view, things can get muddled. And so I think when I'm really, if we're talking through it, thinking about one coalition that fights the exact from the exact point of view as the NRA, which is it's our constitutional right to have a gun. And it is. I'm not against guns. You know, I'm just would like things, my children and your children and my daughter's children, not to have to go to school and worry about, you know, violence with guns. And inner city, there shouldn't be the kind of gun availability that there is now. But that's the point. It's very complicated. But yeah, I thought I'd throw it out there and maybe enter it into the conversation, and maybe somebody else will pick up on it.
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
write some letters, Colin.
Write some letters. In the words of Groucho Marx, I'm not in the habit of making threats, but there will be a strongly worded letter in the New York Times about this tomorrow. So, yeah, I mean, look, you know, there's so much that one could say about all this, but one of the things that I think is somewhere in the American psyche is the notion of kind of an allowable death total for some reason or in some sector, not just in this one too, but there's sort of a sense that a certain kind of death is breakage. You know, it's just kind of priced into people's understanding of this society, you know, and that can be gun deaths, deaths of people of color, deaths of people in urban environments, deaths from COVID. There are people who just sort of decide, well, you know, I know 825,000 people have died from this disease, but I still don't think it's really that serious. I think this is just sort of the kind of thing that goes on. A lot of them are old, they're in nursing homes, whatever, you know. And I think it used to be the kind of thing where people are going to die, you know, was sort of a trump card, right? You should pardon the expression. People are going to die was something that you couldn't necessarily ignore, whatever you're talking about. And you know, always in the history of American society, I don't know if always, but for a long time in the history of American society, there's been an understanding that, yes, a certain number of deaths really is kind of allowable. I mean, one of the things that is done kind of on an actuarial basis is the calculation of how much a regulatory change would cost and how many deaths it would prevent. And if it costs like $1 billion to only prevent 3 deaths, you know, they don't do it. I'm picking very extreme numbers. But there's some kind of magic number. It's like, okay, this is what saving a life is worth. And if it costs more than that, then it's not worth doing. And we've taken that kind of actuarial logic and just, in a way, thrown out the logic part of it. It just said, well, a bunch of people are going to die from guns. A bunch of people are going to die in cities. A bunch of people of color are going to die way sooner than comparable white people. And, you know, and we're just kind of okay with that. I mean, just the way the world works. Sorry about it, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I'm laughing. It's appalling. But it is, in fact, the way people increasingly think. And I mean, and it is, you can't, to the people who want to minimize the importance of January 6th, you can't say, you know, you can't cite the number of policemen who died, the number of police officers who suffered serious injuries, the ones who took their lives afterwards as a pretty obviously directed consequence or contributory consequence anyway of what they went through. It just didn't mean anything. They don't go, okay, well, fine, and then some cops died. So what? You know, it's the price of having a democracy where you can storm the Capitol. You know, and at a certain point, it's harder and harder to have that conversation. And never has it been harder. I mean, you know, I absolutely do think, and I think his staffers have said, that the absolute worst days of the Obama presidency were the days in which he realized that Sandy Hook was not going to result in, to use the caller's phrase, common sense gun control, that was not going to happen, that Obama's sense of despair and cynicism was never more acute than it was there, as well it might be, you know. So anyway, all right, let's go to another W town. Our number is 888-720-WNPR, 888-720-9677. You don't have to bring up things in the news. You can bring up deep philosophical questions, cultural matters, you know, everyday living issues. I'm happy to talk to you about anything. I'm at your disposal. 888-720-WNPR. Let's move on to Matt in Waterbury. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Colin. How are you?
I am just fine.
Good. Quick question. I kind of want to hear your opinion as to when we will actually get around to appointing a special counsel to investigate the criminal aspects of January 6th. It's becoming increasingly apparent that the Republicans, if they take over the House of Representatives, that they certainly will do everything within their power to squelch the investigation. And as we saw with Mueller and now Durham, once they're appointed, you really can't get rid of them. So in order to get a full accounting, I'm curious what your opinion would be.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the threshold question for when you appoint a special counsel, and because you can't. My recollection is that you can't just do it because you feel like it. But I can't answer that question intelligently until I actually look at, and also the special counsel law, as you probably know, was revised pretty extensively. So I'd want to look at that first and see. I mean, there's. To my way of thinking, anyway, what the special committee is doing right now is what a special counsel would do. I don't know that a special counsel would be in a position to do a deeper dive than what this committee is doing right now. The stuff that the committee is turning up, it's almost on a daily basis, is pretty shocking and pretty troubling. I think the larger question might be, well, I don't know. I don't know what to think, actually. But yeah.
Given the relative ease with which we got one for Durham's investigation, I mean, it would seem that bar is set pretty low.
Yeah, I just, before I opined about it, I would just want to refresh my memory about, what the actual threshold is. But meanwhile, I would just encourage people to watch what this committee is turning up, and we're just getting the tip of the iceberg right now. There's more all the time, and everything kind of points in the direction of much more coordination and planning between elected Republican officials, including President Trump himself, and the rioters than had been previously owned up to. So yeah, I don't know.
Would you guess that it's actually harder to, right now they're kind of all blowing off the subpoenas that they're getting from Congress. A number of Republicans have just said, look, I'm not going to come for one reason or another. Would it be more difficult to simply ignore if it were coming from a special counsel? Yeah,
I'm also, I don't feel like I know the answer to that question. But look, you ignore a subpoena at your peril. You wind up in court if you ignore a subpoena. I mean, I don't think it's not perilous to do. With this committee, ignoring a subpoena has contempt of court or contempt of Congress, in this case, charges just, automatically linked to it. So I don't know. But it is sort of true that these things happen, and then the next thing you know, Steve Bannon is kind of prancing around in his usual disheveled horribleness. I mean, today it's been suggested, it's been reported, I think, by Axios, that he and one or two other people are actually going to do kind of counter-programming on January 6th, that they somehow or other are going to stage some kind of big event. I don't even know, what could this event be? What could the counter-programming be? An all-star tribute to the rioters?
The neo-deplorables.
Yeah, featuring Kid Rock and stuff. I don't know. They might not even be able to get Kid Rock to do that. All right, we have to take a little break. I'm sorry I'm not more responsive on that question. I just feel like radio, particularly radio like this where there's no guests and stuff like that, way too comfortable just sort of saying, oh, yeah, let's do it that way. Maybe even during the break I can try to figure this out.
So hard to please, but look around, leaves are brown, and the sky is a hazy shade of winter. Hear the Salvation Army band down by the riverside. It's bound to be a better ride than what you got
a stone's throw from the precipice paused? Did he jump or did he fall as he gazed into the morning mist? Did he raise both fists and say to hell with this and jest?
That's Andrew Bird. We need more whistling on the show, I feel. We did a whole episode about whistling. It's one of my favorite episodes ever, really. It was many years ago, but we need more whistling on the show. All right, so I was able to sort of refresh my memory, and so here's, I think, the problem. So to appoint a special counsel has to be appointed by the Attorney General. The Attorney General, or who's ever acting in place of a recused Attorney General. But in this case, I think it would be Merrick Garland. He would have to say that something needs to be investigated. There needs to be a criminal investigation that for some reason or other cannot be done by the Department of Justice without there being a conflict of interest. That's sort of what it comes down to. I'm not really sure there's a rationale there, Let me just look at the second part of the guidance on it. Conflict of interest in the DOJ and that it would be in the public interest to appoint an outside special counsel, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that meets the threshold. So, the DOJ has been able to prosecute these people pretty effectively. I mean, you can sort of say they're not getting the sentences that you'd kind of hope people like that would get, but it's not the DOJ's job to arrive at sentences that we would like. They've also decided to do stuff like not invoke the domestic terrorism law that allows for an intensification of an existing sentence for a recognized crime. It's kind of a sentence enhancement provision. They haven't gone that route for whatever reason. But I don't think you can get a special counsel in this unless I'm missing something, which wouldn't be all that unusual. All right, so we're all right. Let's go to. We had a good streak of towns that begin with W, but Sean is calling from Pawling, New York. Although considering that truth and fact are no longer acknowledged in America, we could say that he's calling from Walling, New York. All right, Sean, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. This is my first time listening to your show. I was listening as I'm driving in the car. Quick side note, if I could, I appreciate what you said about President Obama and Sandy Hook. My cousin is a teacher at Sandy Hook and was there that day. So I appreciate you shining a light on that.
Yeah, I just to sort of say one more thing about this. The problem with this was, as a journalist here in Connecticut, I'll never forget that day. And it was, I think, for everybody who had to deal with it in any way, it was a horribly scarring event. And it's kind of like you sort of have to get rid of the whole idea of speaking of thresholds, there being a threshold at which point the country has to act. Because if that's not the threshold, if those kids and teachers going into work or going into school on a normal school day and dying, if that's not the threshold at which you say, all right, this has really gone too far, we're really going to have to do something, then there isn't one. You can think of all the stuff that's come after, whether it's Orlando or Las Vegas or whatever, higher body counts, whatever. There isn't a threshold. There isn't a point at which people say, this is too horrific. We've got to do something. The people who think that already think that, and the people who don't think that are never going to think that. All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good segue into what I was thinking about. You mentioned philosophical questions, and I asked myself, well, what is the philosophical view of our culture these days? If I were to try and put it into a single word, it would be greed. Greed for not just material resources, but greed for power, greed for influence. And I think it applies to what you just said, because there's no threshold, because people just I want what I want at any cost. It doesn't matter if children are shot to death. I want my guns, and I think that's the kind of attitude. And I see it from either side of the political spectrum. Conservatives are greedy to have it the way they want and nothing else, and there's no compromise, just gimme, gimme, gimme. And I see that often from the liberal side as well. And so it makes me start to think, what is really driving our culture other than that? Is there anything to do with good moral qualities of the heart anymore? We say that we stand for freedom and equality and liberty and so forth, but those things need to be maintained through our actions.
Yeah, I would.
And
I would agree with you. The only way that I would sort of fine tune what you're saying, and it could be just as a result of a lot of books that are coming out right now. And I just got through reading Elizabeth Colbert's piece in the New Yorker, where she looks at a lot of the books that are coming out right now that sort of raise questions about what's going on with our democracy and the fraying of the fabric. And I think the other possible answer is that we're dominated by tribalism, that winning against the other side, owning the libs, to use the conservative expression, has become more important than anything else. And she begins her review. It's terrific. She begins her review with apparently this sort of true story that took place in 1954 in Oklahoma, I think, where these two groups of boys went to a summer camp. They didn't know about each other's existence. They were in cabins where you couldn't see the other cabin, and they were there for quite a while, kind of, forming a group identity. And then they found out the existence of this other group, and they just decided they just hated them. They wanted to beat them in various games. They'd get mad if they didn't win. It just doesn't take that. If you ever played pickup basketball, it really is sort of true that, if you're playing 5-on-5, you have to give up the court when you lose. The amount of team identity that can happen in the matter of 7 or 8 sweaty minutes, is kind of amazing. And I do think that the subgroup identity of the two political parties has become more important than the kind of uber identity of the country in the ways that you're talking about. And I think in that situation, it's hard to make common cause, even about things we should easily make common cause about. You get the last word.
And that's I really appreciate that thought, and it's a good analogy. What I would say, now, full disclosure, I consider myself to be a very liberally minded person. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely refuse to vote for anyone who would be involved with Trump. That said, I see from the side that I do support with my vote, the Democratic side, the liberal side, that even though I agree with the goal of we should all be equal under the law. We should all have equal opportunity and the same right to vote and representation and so forth. But I think that their method for trying to achieve that has become a bit faulty, because what I see is there's a lot of accentuating differences, and I believe it's unintended. This person is identifying as transgender, or this person's identifying as, such and such category. They're breaking everybody out into categories that are distinguished by their differences. And I think that increases the type of tribalism that you're talking about. And I don't believe that's their intent. I think it's just a mistake of method. But the way to bring us together, I think, is to find our commonalities.
Well, what you're talking about, I think, is identity politics. I think identity politics are for the most part, they may be an effective way of mobilizing certain bases in certain situations, but they're not an effective way to govern. And I think long term, they're not even an effective way to conduct partisan politics. I mean, they may be a legitimate minor component in certain situations. You would like to have a system of governance and a group of people in positions of power who could rectify some of the problems of the past, or make sure that we didn't have another George Floyd summer.
Right.
You'd like to do that, and to do that requires some kind of a reckoning about identity. But I would agree that basing politics and political strategy and political rhetoric, chiefly on identity, is a mistake. And both sides do it. I mean, the 2016 Trump campaign was identity politics. It was white identity politics. It was, you white people, there are a lot of people who want to take away stuff that's kind of basically been baked into your lives. And whether it's immigrants, to set up another call we're going to go to in a few minutes, whether it's immigrants or transgender people or people of color, the hegemony that you've enjoyed, not that they would use that word, is imperiled. So, I mean, it's absolutely the case that identity politics is kind of out of control in the Democratic Party and on the left. but it's also very much the fuel of what we've seen on the right. And so I wouldn't want to, put the disease only on one side. All right. I think what we should do is take a break. This show is like just going very fast. I feel like we're just kind of getting warmed up here. But when we take a break, I will organize my thoughts or fail to organize my thoughts, and we'll come back. That sounds like a plan.
They drowned me in the Jordan when they tried to wash me clean. They got the stains out, but now it's too damn hard to breathe. They told me he's a good Lord as they tied the shackles to my feet. They drowned me in the Jordan, and then they walked away.
All right, we're back. Time to thank Kat Pastor. She's our technical producer today and every day. And Jonathan McPants is the person in there screening the calls and try to help me make this whole format work. It's called Ask or Tell Me Anything. Is that what it's called? Anyway, people call in 888-720-WNPR. We're going to get to a couple more calls we have up on the board. I wanted to say a couple more things apropos of what Sean said. Because first of all, I'm surprised that we're not talking about this moment in COVID. We just broke a record that you never want to break. Yesterday it was a million point something COVID cases, which in this country, which is not only a record for us, but it's a record for the world. In fact, I think our previous record was like 590,000 cases in one day. And I think the competing country with the most cases in one day is India, and they had like 414,000 cases in one day. This is, I don't have my tablet in front of me, but I think it's something like that. So we went over 1 million yesterday. So USA. I'm surprised we're not talking about that the callers aren't, but I don't tell the callers what to say. But one thing that I do think, apropos of COVID and everything else, and it kind of gets into Sean's question a little bit, and maybe some of the other people who called, is we got to get better at admitting we're wrong when we're wrong, and to do it in a very open way. And we've got to get better at accepting it when people say, "Oh, I was wrong." I think in COVID, just for example, I'm stealing this idea from Andy Slavitt, who was one of the heads of Biden's initial COVID work groups, whatever it was called. And before that, I think he was Obama's like Ebola guy or something. And Andy has a podcast called In the Bubble. And this is a point that he made. He said, we got to get better at just saying, okay, I was wrong about that. We were wrong about that. Because one of the problems we're having right now is that when things change, as they will in an evolving situation, you want to be able to incorporate new information without that amounting to a loss of face. So, it should be much easier for the medical establishment to say, you know what, when we were first reporting the results of vaccine trials and stuff like that, we may have misled people, or we may have just been wrong about the protection from infection afforded by the vaccines. What the vaccines do incredibly well is prevent serious symptom displays, prevent hospitalizations, prevent deaths. That's what they do. We probably made it sound like you just would never test positive. That's just not the way it works. If we said that, we were wrong. And it should be possible for them to say that and not feel like they're losing faith. And it should also be possible for people maybe kind of on the other side of scientific ideology, which unfortunately there is. There's scientific ideology now. There's like bioscience ideology. It should be possible for the people who question the government's policies around something like COVID. It should be possible for those people to say, oh, okay, thank you. That helps me understand what's going on right now. But what happens instead is if anything changes, and we can use the vaccine thing as an example again, although there are plenty of other examples. If anything changes, if Fauci says something different from what he said 2 months ago, and by the way, props to Fauci. He's a terrific guy, and his service to the country is beyond question. I've come to the conclusion he was really the wrong guy to be the sort of public point person on this. He just makes too many of those kinds of mistakes and doesn't explain them well and doesn't correct them all that well. But in any case, that shouldn't matter. You should be able to say, okay, we got it wrong. Here's how we see it now. And that shouldn't ratchet up the questioning of scientific truth. And that's the problem. And as a result, both biosciences and I think the press to a certain degree, I think we sort of minimize it. We don't communicate it very well. We don't say, you know what, they got it wrong. We told you the wrong stuff too. What we should have emphasized. I mean, like here's the number you want to know today, and this is like a real number. Roughly 70%. I think it's 68.8, but roughly 70% of the people hospitalized for COVID symptoms in Connecticut are unvaccinated. So it's almost 70%. Now, in the general population, the number of people who are unvaccinated is around 25%. So 25% of the population is making up 70% of the hospitalizations. When you know that, vaccines work. You know that vaccines are in fact preventing serious symptom patterns and hospitalization among the people who are fully vaccinated. But I mean, it's also okay to just say, look, we told you something that isn't exactly right. We made it sound like you would never test positive or you'd never have any kind of symptoms or that's not how the vaccine works. And some of it is because of the transmission dynamics of the specific disease and the vaccine itself. And we got to get better at that. And then people have to get better at accepting it instead of saying, oh, well, if you're wrong about that, then you're wrong about everything else. And we should never have to listen to you at all because you don't know what you're talking about. And I have a great immune system and I'm not getting vaccinated and I'm going out to the bar tonight with no mask on because you got something wrong. I mean, that's one of the reasons that people are reluctant to admit they are wrong. All right. Enough for me. Let me go to the phones. In South Windsor, we have Gru calling us. Hi, you're on the air.
Hello, Colin. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. So I just had 2 points that I wanted to just share with you guys, and a little bit premise before that. I am from India. I work here in South Windsor as an engineer for a really nice company, and being an immigrant or so-called legal immigrant here in America, I've seen this trend or this thing happening right now that we are short of a lot of high-skilled labor, as well as all sorts of labor. But then every time I get a call from a recruiter or somebody, as soon as I tell them that I might need a sponsorship in the future, the answer is, look, oh, we don't work with that. So right now we are in trouble, and then there are people who are available to work here. I don't know why government is not, sort of helping get more and more labor, workforce in there. Instead of doing that, actually, American Consulate in India, they are stopping work visa interviews. They are letting students in, they are letting tourists in, but I don't know, they are not probably giving more appointments for work visa. So that was the first part. And the second part is still it's 2022 and we still face a humongous pay gap between a lot of people, especially immigrants who are working in the tech sector still. So it's it's frustrating and confusing at the same time. So what I hope is some of our friends who are working with the recruiters or who are recruiters who are listening, work in HR, they can provide sort of insight why this happens and how can we resolve all of this.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that a lot of this, particularly the first part of your question anyway, well, all of it comes down to dollars, right? Comes to dollars and cents. And if it's going to cost $3,500 extra to hire a person because of sponsorship costs or whatever, You know, I mean, a lot of companies are just going to say, well, that's not in our budget. You know, this is what our budget is. Our budget is we're going to hire somebody and we're going to pay them X amount of money. So, but you're also right that it starts to look especially crazy in the middle of a labor shortage, a generalized labor shortage, and then a shortage of particular kinds of skilled labor, and also just a massive job burnout problem that's exacerbating the labor shortage. It seems like, you know, it ought to be made a little bit easier to maybe get talented, skilled people like you into the mix. And I just don't know enough about this to say much more that's intelligent about it. But I would agree with your point anyway, you know. And I think companies I think also, you know, a lot of times the first person who hears about this in a company isn't maybe the person who ultimately can take a broader view and say, well, wait, you know, this guy grew. He's exactly what we're looking for. So what if it costs us $3,500 more? So what if it takes, like, you know, a few extra weeks while we sort this out? That's the guy we want. So let's just do it. I mean, we'll get the $3,500 back when he shows up and starts doing a really great job for us. So, I mean, in some ways, you need that corporate culture too, in addition to maybe the government softening the blow. I don't know. You know more about this than I do. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are fairly simple. I mean, you know, I've been working with some of the teams, you know, recruiting teams and whatnot, and I think the cost to, you know, go and, like, you know, search for another candidate is more than that $3,500 sometimes. I mean, it depends on the position, and that happens quite often here. And still, you know, there should be sort of a safety net that government builds that, okay, we are bringing in more labor. It should be easier for them to, you know, sort of blend into the workforce. And touching on the philosophical side of that, like, you know, being from India, we have been always been taught, like, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is your family, help them out. But I think the other side doesn't see it that way, because, you know, one of the big political party in America says that, oh, we are okay with legal immigrants, which is such a BS concept. You know, all immigrants are immigrants. That's what I think. But they, like, even that party does not try to look into this issue, like how to fold in, you know, this kind of workforce. On the other side, when we come in as international students, we get like we pay 4 times the fees. So,
well, assuming I'm just going to cut you short because we're almost out of time here. As a matter of fact, I can't take another call, I guess. But yeah, assuming the conditions that exist right now persist, there's never been a better time to renegotiate all kinds of aspects in America of employment practice and employment law. There's such a tremendous incentive to be able to have more people, a greater pool of applicants to hire from, or any applicants in some cases to hire from. It's a great time to start re-examining these questions, kind of opening up that book and looking at it again. I'm sorry I didn't get to Pam's question. She wanted to say, as a scientist, science isn't wrong. It changes. But when you're communicating with the public about science, you have to be really careful about this, particularly in an era where 45 seconds of a presentation that you make can be excerpted into a single YouTube clip and then played over and over again for months and months and months. So there's like a clip of Fauci early in the pandemic saying asymptomatic transmission has never driven a pandemic. You know, it's very unlikely that asymptomatic transmission is a big part of this because there's never been a pandemic that's had that. Well, I mean, there's people still circulating that clip. I mean, since then, obviously, he's revised his thinking. But you shouldn't say something that dispositive so early. It's a kind of mistake that Fauci routinely makes. And it is kind of wrong. It's wrong to say that when you don't really know that that's the case. All right, I'm being told that the show is over, which I actually kind of know too. Anyway, thanks to everybody who helped out. And sorry the show went by so fast.
The number you have reached has been disconnected.